There's all these rumors that you would hear about what a hospital gets paid per COVID death.
Ivermectin alone, if properly utilized, is capable of driving this pathogen to extinction.
More than 250 scientists, doctors, nurses, and researchers wrote a letter to Spotify about the misinformation on COVID vaccines and the pandemic spread on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Turn out that COVID misinformation scandal surrounding comedian and podcaster against Rogan wrong his podcast major
Okay, my name is Dan Pike, aka D.K Pike. That's my author name, right? I'm 30 years old. I'm from Northamptonshire originally, but I've lived in Weymouth since 2008, so what's that, 15 years ago now. Personal trainer, author, and podcaster. Right, so with my friend Sean, we did a podcast called Save Room Podcast. It's a reference to Resident Evil where you could, in the game, it was just relentless zombies, and the only time you could save your game was in the save room, where there was no zombies. So it was kind of like a play on the idea that, you know, it was the studio or the place that the podcast in itself was a safe space to have free discourse, conversation without worrying about, you know, people pulling you up for it. It's just like, just speak. But yeah, the idea of the podcast was just anything goes. You know, the idea that you could, we were so into like writing, we were so into science fiction, we were so into anything that was just wacky, anything that was just like, anything worth exploring, things that interested us when we were kids. You know, we'd play a lot of video games when we were younger. We'd play like Halo, we'd play Metroid on the GameCube, whatever it may be. And we'd explore things like aliens, we'd explore things like interstellar travel, or philosophical things, where it's like, what if, you know, what if you could time travel? What if you know what I mean? Or movie trivia, or TV trivia, or any sort of referential kind of humor, callbacks, comedy, whatever. As I was thinking earlier, like, it's unrestrained conversation almost to an extent. You know, you can basically say what you want, upload it to the internet, as long as it's not like, you know, extreme hate crime or like, you know, barbaric stuff. It's fine, because there's no one there really to say otherwise. And also when it comes to accessibility, you know, podcasts you can do on your phone, you can do it through your TV, you can do it like, whereas radio is kind of limited to the car, or it's limited to frequency. You know, certain places you can't really get a radio. You know, with a podcast you can, if you've got Spotify Premium or Apple, whatever, you can download the podcast, and even if your phone's offline, you can still listen to it. So accessibility more than anything. Without sounding too cliche, Joe Rogan was always interesting because of the kind of reach that he had. I was kind of late to the game. I didn't really start watching him until 2017 when I was living abroad, and you know, French TV is, I can understand, I speak and understand the language, but it's more effort than it's worth. If you just want to sit back and relax and listen to your own language, I could get my phone out. It was an iPhone 4 at the time, a bit backwards. I've only got an iPhone 7 now, right? And you could do, what do they call it, screen share. So I could put the podcast on and put it on the TV in France. And that's how I got into Joe Rogan. But it wasn't just him, it was Bill Burr. He does a podcast where it's just him talking. It's called the Monday Morning Podcast, I think it's called. And it's just him talking, like nonsense. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes he's going on about American sports. Right, so for those who don't know what Hot Ones is, they have Sean Evans is the host, and he'll interview whoever. Might be these days you have A-list celebrities, right? And he was so good at his job that he would be able to know these things about these people that not many people would. He really did his research, and he was so relatable, and he was able to kind of make the guest, so at ease and comfortable that they would just bring the guard down, and it just flowed so well. So if anything, Sean Evans was my inspiration. It was like, make the guest part of the conversation. If you start saying the right things, they're going to let that guard down and think, oh, I can now discuss this thing rather than be rigid, you know. Going back to your last question, you know, sometimes with certain like late night TV shows, they'll be kind of restrained to like a 10-minute time frame in which they could have that conversation with a celebrity. In podcasting these days, you can talk to a celebrity for an hour and a half to 2 hours on that podcast. Whereas like back in the 90s, 10 minutes, adverts, bring on the next guest, show's over, right? It's like, I want more of that. You know, it's a difficult one because it's only really been the last year or so that I've sort of pulled back from it because it was an interesting time for us as a species to witness that. You know, whether it be with COVID or whether it be with the lockdown measures or the vaccines, you know, it was really a difficult time for a lot of people. And what I appreciate about what Joe Rogan did, because even from the very beginning, I remember when it all started off in March of 2020, I can't remember the doctor's name, but he brought him on board to talk about what this could be. And it was very doom and gloom, but he would try his best to try and get different sides of the political aisle to get that, well, for the most part anyway. And, you know, there was a whole ivermectin thing, wasn't there? And it was just so much noise. Like, I just try not to engage in it anymore. You know, I know where I stand with it politically. You know, I'm more like libertarian rather than authoritarian. I'm all about, you know, all I care about is transparency, right? Just tell us everything. Don't treat us like children, you know, because the problem is, like, especially with like mainstream media, is that they're a business at the end of the day, whether it be newspapers or whether it be BBC News. They want to try and condense something that's very nuanced. It doesn't even have to be COVID. It could be like the Ukrainian conflict between the Russians, right? They try and condense it to like a bite-sized 5-minute piece when really it's like a 7-year-long plus issue that's takes a lot of time to really do a deep dive on and kind of understand it isn't just black and white. There's a lot of shade all over the place, right? Yeah, so the mainstream media, they'll try and condense things into bite-sized talking points, right? Like headlines. And it's like, it's a lot more complicated than that, you know? And where podcasting goes right and where it goes wrong is that, you know, we're able to explore things in a longer form in a way that wasn't really accessible 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, really. And, you know, we're able to kind of, if we're willing to put the time and the effort, we can kind of come to our own conclusions. You know, any rational adult is going to be able to kind of cherry pick different things, and then eventually they'll be able to form their own analysis and be like, oh, I kind of get it now. That's kind of what I try to do. But again, there's right and wrong on both sides. The concept of you know, misinformation means information that's missing context. I remember one thing I always had an issue with is, like, on one end you had people who were saying, right, we got a lockdown, we got to save lives, we got to protect people, get the vaccine, wear a mask, right? So that was one side of the argument. It was just like, fair enough, right? I get it, right? Because everybody has different, you know, all different walks of life. Someone might have a very sick parent or relative who's got a low immune system, right? And, you know, regardless of how you feel, COVID did really mess up some people who had comorbidities, right? And so from their perspective, it's like, okay, they got to protect their loved ones, right? And then you get someone on the other side of the political spectrum that'll be like, well, you know, my freedoms, you know? And it's like, it makes sense because you see what they're doing in China, like welding those, you know, there's whether it be TikTok or Instagram, but, you know, they had that zero COVID policy, and it's just not possible, all right? It's unsustainable is what I'm trying to say. And there's these different agendas as well of, like, profits over people. You know, the politicians were putting in their rules, but they were breaking those same rules. Matt Hancock, Bojo, or Boris Johnson, sorry, right? People in America, France, America, you know what I mean? I can't think on the top of my head their names, but whether it be Nancy Pelosi, whether it be Trump, whether it be Joe, whatever. And, you know, it's a struggle because we're trying to achieve this objective truth, but it really differs from person to person because of their circumstances, because of their environment, you know. Regarding when it comes to, like, how you deal with that on, like, podcasting, it's a difficult one because everybody wants to talk, you know, their truth, right? And it does differ. And that's what you've got to be careful of, is controlled opposition, right? Where they say, oh no, I've got the answers, and they're just as full of shit as the other side of the political spectrum. So you really just have to find your truth and be mindful and just be willing to put your ego aside and admit, oh, maybe I was wrong about this, or maybe I could have gone about this differently, you know? Just try and have a bit of compassion. Be willing to, you know, educate yourself. And, you know, that's the whole point of life, really, isn't it? I mean, the learning never stops, does it?